Alright, today we're going to talk about what makes a good guitar. With Christmas and the winter holidays in full swing, I'm sure we're all thinking about the guitars we want and the guitars we love to play. And as we're thinking about these things, I'm sure we're asking ourselves, what's important to have in one of these instruments? What are some good specs to have? What's a good body shape? What's a good level of comfort? All these things. Before jumping into this discussion, I just have to say I'm not sponsored by any of the brands shown in this video, okay? So in choosing and playing a guitar, is it important to have the flashiest, most interesting specs? For example, having a figured top like on this Ibanez J Custom. Is it important to have a nice looking instrument? You could argue that looks do matter. You're going to want to pick up the guitar and play it. You're going to have to see it every day. And of course, when you're performing, you're going to want the audience to see the guitar too. So then does it matter to you if the guitar looks super exotic or flashy with a figured maple top? Of course, there's other things too that the audience might not see, like a flamed maple neck. Especially if there's a different wood for the fretboard, they're usually not going to see the back of the neck. So maybe that would be something you, the player, would only see. Of course, speaking of the neck, there's other things too, like having fancy binding, like this is flamed maple binding, or maybe inlays that go beyond just the functional dots. Is it important to have, like for example, this Tree of Life inlay? So do you think a good guitar would have these kinds of features, these luxuries? Of course, beyond the flashy and luxurious, there's also the utilitarian and the functional. Is it important to have a functional design? No crazy bells or whistles, just the things you need. For example, would you want bevels and comfort cuts all over the guitar to make sure none of it gets in the way of your playing? Maybe aesthetics would take a backseat. For example, with headless guitars, some people love them, some people really don't. But maybe the weight savings in the compact form would be valuable to you. Of course, when it comes to functionality and playability, there's always the question of if things that aren't necessarily easy to play around contribute to the tone at all. For example, maybe having a thick neck or a square heel joint versus having a thin neck and an all-access neck joint. Maybe those contribute to tone, maybe those don't. But are those good for you? Are those important for you? Would you rather have a guitar that's more easily playable, or maybe something you have to work a little harder to use, like a thicker neck, or having to reach around a square heel joint? You know, there's a lot to be said. Of course, we're practicing our instrument, but there's a lot to be said versus having something that helps the player versus something that's more aiming to sound good, or maybe stay more true to historical specifications. And maybe the latter is important to you. There is a certain look to more historical things, even if they're not as playable as something more ultra-modern. And then there's a question of the controls on the guitar, so the potentiometers, the pickup selector switch, all of that. Is it better to have something more simple? Is it better to have something that has more options, maybe something in between? Especially these days, there's lots of guitars out there with 5-way switches and voice switchings and coil splits and all that. You could ask the question, do you really need all of these? Do you need a 5-way switch? Do you use those tones in the 2 and 4 position? Or maybe you just need a 3-way switch and you just use the full neck pickup, the full bridge pickup, maybe the position in between. Do you need a tone knob? Because I know a lot of people don't use the tone knob. I almost never use it too. Maybe on my single coil guitars I do, but not really on the humbucker guitars. I know this guitar here, it has the Fishman, so it has the voice switch right there, but I always keep it on voice 1. Of course, circling back on the popularity of specs and the functionality, are some functional things necessary? Especially if they're polarizing. For example, having a Richlite fretboard. Now, it definitely does not feel like wood in any way, but it is claimed to be more stable, especially under temperature changes. Would it be important to have this kind of functionality, even if it's starting to stray from the more traditional thing? Because to some extent, having a wood fretboard is a key part of the experience of playing guitar. You know, we all love our ebony wood or our maple fretboards, rosewood, etc. Of course, there's stainless steel frets. A lot of people like them. They like the smoothness and the durability. There's the classic nickel silver frets, which a bunch of people also prefer. And then, of course, there's things like the locking tuners, too. There they are. Some people really like them. Some people really dislike them and find them unnecessary. So how functional versus traditional should a guitar be? That's always a fun question to think about because at the end of the day, these are tools for our trade. We're crafting music with these. We're performing, we're recording, we're having a good time. But then, of course, there's the question, how much should these tools cost? What level of quality should we expect? Let's discuss this. So if money was no issue, and any guitar had infinite supply, so you can get it wherever, it's not scarce, everyone would probably pick the highest quality guitar. But of course, in the real world, there's supply, demand, things cost money, compromises have to be made. So what is a good compromise? What's a good balance between something easily available versus something high quality and just outstanding? On one hand, there's extremely inexpensive guitars, and those are pretty easy to get. The barrier for entry is pretty low. They don't cost that much money. And there are compromises there in the quality of the materials. So the wood might not be the most resonant. The wiring might be hastily done. Maybe there's no shielding for EM noise. Maybe the bridge pieces are sharp. Maybe the fretwork is a little lacking. Using that kind of instrument could be counterproductive if you're having to fight against it the whole time, fix it every now and then, and if it's producing like just a lot of noise in the tracks, feeding back a lot for the audience. But it is readily available, and if you lose it, if it's stolen, if it's damaged, you could get another one pretty easily. Maybe your bassist plunges his headstock into the guitar body. Well, you can just go buy another one, no problem. But on the other hand, something built by a master builder, like the top of the custom shop stuff, that's going to cost a fortune to get your hands on. And once you do get your hands on it and something happens to it, it might be more difficult to replace. There could be more scarcity around how many there are. Maybe it was a custom build, so there was only one of them. And if it is a custom build and you're waiting for it, you're going to have to play a different instrument in the meantime. So what level of cost savings versus quality is the most useful? Of course, we talked about custom builds, but what if it's meant to be mass produced? Where should that line be between quality and availability? I think it should be good enough to not cause any issues when both recording and performing with the instrument. But I don't think the guitar has to be necessarily top shelf to be usable. So what are my overall thoughts? Would I rather have a unique and exotic instrument or something more functional and utilitarian to work with? Well, clearly I like guitars and I haven't chosen just one, but that's a pretty safe answer. So I'm going to go ahead and say I've had the most fun with the upper mid-range guitars, upper mid-range to somewhat higher up. For example, this Prestige right here, I do like the quality of the construction. This particular one hasn't given me any issues. It sounds pretty good. It has basically all the specs I like. I personally prefer the ebony fretboard, the stainless steel frets, all that modern stuff. The actives are okay. I have no real complaints about the Fishman Fluence Moderns. I am starting to lean towards passives more, but these are plenty usable. But I've also had a lot of fun with my Solars, my Solar 1 series, along with my Ibanez Genesis series, which isn't technically a Prestige, but it is made in Japan. And even though that guitar doesn't have all the specs I like, the Genesis has the square neck heel, for example, which personally I'm not a fan of. The quality is there and the playability is there, so it is an enjoyable instrument to play. And of course the Solars, I'm a fan of the neck profile. It's a little thicker than the Ibanez, but it is comfortable to play over a long period of time. You can still do the shreds and the riffs and stuff like that on it. But what matters to you? Would you rather have a top shelf high-end guitar? Would you rather have something that is more easily replaceable? Something more functional or utilitarian? Maybe something high quality? Let me know down in the comment section below. You know this is YouTube, so I have to say all the YouTube things. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share the video, print out every frame and mail it, become a channel member, join the Discord, check out the Patreon, do a backflip, and as always, peace.